to do it professionally and accurately is to single point, recut the threads. That's the only way.
Geoff Montgomery here from Accurate Rifles and Restorations. Today we're going to go over my blueprinting process. A process that I have sort of molded and shaped over the years. Experience has led to certain ways and concepts and methods that I've used over the years that I've found very successful. Just to preface this, I learned pretty much everything about blueprinting, starting with Greg Tannell. Greg was a very kind of spearheaded that whole revolution or whatever you want to call it back in the 90s. You know, he had a handheld VHS camcorder and made some videos explaining the process and kind of showing it actually in his own shop. And I was fascinated by it. You know, once I started shooting long range, I just really got obsessed with squeezing every last ounce of accuracy out of a rifle that I could. I'm always changing, I'm always learning, I'm always talking to other people. So this process is ongoing. It's not like I'm set in my ways and I just, you know, this is how it is and I'll never do anything different. No. And then in the summer of 2021, I actually was privileged to have Gordy Gritters come to the shop. And Gordy spent a week with me, and I've completed and graduated his precision rifle building class, the Extreme Accuracy Institute. So I've been kind of trained, I've apprenticed with these guys. So it's not like I'm just reading books or watching videos. You know, I've had actual training, one-on-one, lessons. You know, I was doing it before actually apprenticing for those guys. You know, I watched their videos essentially and just practiced on my own. Anyway, so we're going to go through. I've got almost all my tooling, what involves the entire process laid out in front of you here. So it's not just a mess of stuff here. This is all tooling or fixtures or metrology or whatever, something that is involved with the blueprinting process. And actually, I'm forgetting one thing here real quick. Can't forget the old poopy toast. So we'll get into that in a little while. As per usual, this is not a scripted video. I'm just going right off the cuff here. So I guess we'll start at the start, you know, the process. What do I do first? So what is there to do? So we've got a Remington, right? So Remingtons, Winchesters, Weatherbys, even the old Mausers and Springfields and Enfields, and basically any kind of bolt action that's a cylindrical bolt action that can fit in my jig here, we can do some sort of accurizing on. Now the Remington just is synonymous with, there's so many of them and all the clones are based off of this. We'll just go ahead and use the Remington as the example. So you know what you got is a factory produced action receiver, bolt and a receiver. So obviously mass production and factories don't lend to like extreme tolerances, or they're basically mass produced and spit out as quickly as possible. So the features, the machining, the tolerances are not quite as tight as you would see on custom stuff or expensive actions that are out there now, like a Defiance or Still or Fierce or Mac Brothers or Impact Precision and all those guys. And I have nothing against using those. I've used plenty of those actions in the past. It just depends on the budget, the customer, and everything like that. The argument is, you know, why would you put all the money into labor to cut up a Remington when you could just buy a new, like Defiance or something? Well, believe it or not, at least with me, a full-blown blueprint, so the cost of the action in a full-blown blueprint is still under the cost of a Defiance. After the blueprinting stuff is done and done right, these will stand up to any $2,000 action out there, guaranteed. I've seen them shoot. You know, they may not look as fancy, but I guarantee you, if it's done right, with a good barrel, good shooter, good load, they'll keep up with them, no problem. Even Gordy says one of the most accurate rifles he's ever seen in his lifetime in the world is a Remington 700 that's been blueprinted. So there you go. So what are we doing here? We want to basically qualify all the important cuts to the center line of the receiver. We want to have everything be straight, true, square, concentric, and axially aligned with the datum line or center line. So everything's basically based off of, where the cartridge is starting life at, right? So the cartridge sits in your bolt face, goes into a chamber, and is locked up and held in a receiver until it's fired. Everything's contained, it's fired, and then obviously extraction and ejection. Well, you want the cartridge to start life off as straight and square as possible. So what we do and what we found with these actions over the years is they're not exactly straight, based off a proverbial center line here. So we have what are called bushings that are incrementally sized. So I have a whole collection of them here. There's a few different ways to do it. You can use a bolt bore raceway reamer and literally ream out the rear and front portions of the receiver. I'm not a big fan of that. Those reamers are very hard to deal with, and they don't leave very nice finish. And at least in my experience, they tend to cut. They still cut either undersized or they'll kind of gouge a little bit. And I just haven't had a lot of luck with those over the years. And honestly, usually, in most cases, the front and back, they're not exactly the same, but they're close enough, within a thousandths or so, that you can, we'll show this a little later, but you can actually tailor the sleeves on the bolt to kind of accommodate and come up with that, the difference in size. So there's ways around that, and I kind of have been more of a fan of doing it that way. So regardless, what you do is you grab some of these bushings and you just throw them in the action and you see which one fits the best in terms of snugness and tightness and all that stuff. So it looks like that I picked the right one for this. The bushing just sits in there, and you don't want it rattling loose, and you don't want it so tight that you have to force it in there. So I didn't get a look at that number. Let's see, that is a 703 thousandths of an inch diameter. Right, so that one fits in the front. It's not an interference fit, it's more of kind of a press fit, like you saw. I mean, it takes some effort to push in. But again, you don't want to force it in there. And then same deal for the backside. Yep, that's a good one there. So yeah, I kind of had these out. This action's already been blueprinted, so that's why I've already got these selected. So you've got your one in the back and one in the front. Then what you do is you take a alignment rod, and this is just a precision ground, hardened, perfectly straight, perfectly round rod. And one would just feed it into the bushings within the action, kind of like that. Now I push them in until we're bearing on both bushings, and we're fully captured in the back here, and that leaves us with a good 6 inches of a rod to get in there and indicate off of. Okay, so once this is all fitted together, it goes inside my action blueprinting jig. I made this several years ago when I was still in school and still had plenty of time on my hands. I made this out of aluminum, probably 6061 aircraft quality aluminum. It's set up for both short and long actions. So the action literally sits inside this jig and is supported by the 4 set screws that you'll see. So essentially it's a double 4-jaw chuck, right? So that allows alignment both axially and round. So you can get this thing spinning perfectly true in both these planes. So we'll simply slide this into the jig, and I like to hold it as far forward as I can so that I can see a little bit better in there, because when you're working inside a pipe, essentially, you can't really see very well. So that's basically how I'll configure it, and then we'll get the entire large jig here will be supported and held by a 4-jaw chuck in the lathe. So we'll get this guy spinning true. And then we'll proceed to go in and use a dial test indicator to check both these sections here. And the way the jig works is the forward controls here, screws, essentially center the front. So we would be indicating here and using the screws to get that guy round. The rear screws, conversely, affect back here, which translates out front. So, right, if this is held steady and you're changing the back end, look what happens to the front of that rod. So that's essentially what we're doing. This allows us to align everything axially in the conical. And then the front is centering like that, round, basically. Okay, so that's in the lathe. We're getting this spinning as true as humanly possible. And so that's where my Pupitas comes in. The Mar Pupitas is a 1/10,000th of an inch indicator. So this is as extremely sensitive indicating instrument that I can afford, at least in my shop. Goes down to, like I said, each little hash mark there is 1/10,000th. So if you know anything about decimals, a human hair or a piece of paper is about 4/1000. So just to show you on the dial here, there wouldn't be 4 lines. That would be all the way to here, 40. So a thickness of a paper, this device would measure from 0 to 40, 40. So that's how sensitive this guy is. And you'll see that in the footage. So, like I said, this is all set up so that we can read and center the action in the jig, in the lathe. So let's zero this as best we can. 0, 9.5 thousandths. Yeah, 9.5. So that's got a lot of run out right there. Very interesting that there's so much more there than on the face of it. Generally, with Remingtons, I'll see pretty equal amounts. So it's normally 4 to 6 thousandths on surfaces, but it'll be the same on the face and on the threads and the lug abutments and stuff. Lug abutments usually aren't too bad, but this one is considerably out, 10/1000ths of an inch. We'll just round up. So once we're happy with that, the rod would be pulled out carefully, and as you can see, it's not difficult to remove. I go around 40 inch-pounds or so. I don't really measure it, but we're not cranking down on these. We're just holding it tight enough so that nothing moves on us, but we're certainly not crushing into the... We're not getting extremely tight on these set screws here. It's kind of a balancing act. And then these bushings would actually be left inside there just to kind of fill in that and give it a little bit more support for those set screws. You know, just so it just, again, gives it just a little bit more support. It's just for rigidity's sake, really. Doesn't hurt anything, and it's kind of difficult to remove them anyway since they're inside here. So we just leave them in. So once that is all completely aligned, we come in with, in this case, it's a Schar's indexable internal threading tool. So really nice cutter. We've got 3-sided indexable 60-degree threading tool held in by a big Torx screw, and then a very long shank. Obviously, we're only going in about 3/4 of an inch, so very rare that I'd ever have this sticking out so far like that, which would induce chatter and all kinds of crazy, no good stuff. So the machine will be set up for internal threading, 60 degrees. And I'm going to turn this around so it's a little bit, this is how I see it usually in the lathe and in the machine. So this is held into the tool post of the lathe, obviously the tool holder. And it's set up for 16 threads per inch, at least for Remington, or whatever the thread pitch is. And then we'll get this fed in, allowing for plenty of clearance. We'll start the machine and just engage and get the machine running at 16 threads per inch, if it's a Remington, like I said. So once the machine is set, we can kill the power and kind of align the tool into the groove of the thread, using the compound and the cross slide to get that tip into the grooves of the receiver.
Wow.
Once we're happy with the engagement of the thread and the tool and everything like that, we'll just go in and very, very lightly start skimming the threads. And most of the time you'll see and hear one portion of the inside getting cleaned up. So you'll hear like a as it cuts, and it's just hitting that one side, whatever the high side is. So you'll know when this is spinning true and perfectly round. That definitely shows you how the threads and everything else are off in accordance to the center of everything. So we're going in. Usually it takes about 20 thousandths to clean up, 20 thousandths to 30, somewhere in there, from my experience. Some are worse than others. So basically we're just going in 1/1000th or so at a time, very, very, very light cuts, over and over again till the entire thing starts cleaning up. Meaning the entire, again, this has already been blueprinted. This is the one you probably see in the video. We're looking for a complete cleanup, like that, all the way around. Once it's nice, clean, and shiny, like that, we start checking. And so how do you know? So you can measure how much you're cutting in depth-wise, like just watching the cross slide, but that's one thing I was totally unsure of, like how do you know what your major diameter is going to be for the new barrel, right? So you're cutting out all this material. So what I've been doing, and have been doing since I've done this, is making these little stubs, just oversized thread tenons for a 16 thread per inch tenon. As you can see, I've got a whole bunch of them. There's a couple more in the drawer, laying around in the shop and whatnot. But I basically have like the 1.062, which is the nominal size. I'll go 10 thousandths up from there, so 1.072. Then I get a little bit finer on the adjustments, or the 1.077, 1.0779 on this one. 1.080, 082, 086, 090. And then I've got a few for Winchester 70s here. The different Winchester 70 pitches. So obviously that's the newer one with the 28 threads per inch. That's the older one with the 16. Oh, that's a 700. But you get the idea. So as I cut these threads, I'm checking with these stubs. Like I'm checking, I start small and I work my way up till I find the one that's nominally sized. So I know this one is, usually lately I've been cutting them to 1.082, 20 thousandths, and they'll clean up. And so I go in there and I just, like this, screw them in, and we know it's not rattling loose and it's not so tight I need a tool to to screw that in. So if the threads look nice and clean and we're getting a full cut and my stub fits, I'll just stop there. You could keep cutting and making it bigger and bigger if you wanted, but why do that? Once we're cleaned up, we're good. There are 2 more surfaces to actually clean up while we're in this setup. That being the lug abutments down here. So these shiny surfaces facing me down inside here. Right there and there on either side. If you don't know, that's where these lugs actually lock up inside the action. So as the bolt enters the receiver and locks up into battery like that, that's simply where the backs of the lugs engage with the receiver. And that's what physically locks and prevents the bolt from shooting back into your face or anything like that. So it's literally locking up the receiver for detonation of that cartridge. So those 2 surfaces will go in there like you see and just clean those up until they're nicely clean and shiny, just like the threads. Which again takes a few thousandths. Usually one will clean up first and then you'll dial in another half thousandths or thousandths and the other one will clean up. Once those are looking like that, you know they're equally spaced, equal dimensions from here to the surfaces, and you're done. So while I have the boring bar in there, I'll actually come in and just skim the very tops of the threads. Just barely whisk off. So with a boring bar, essentially. Looks a lot like the internal threader, except it's just you could even use this tool. But I'd come in and just barely whisk the tops of those threads. The idea there is just to make sure nothing galls as you're using the new barrel, because these tend to get real sharp on the crests, so on the tops, of the V. So we're just busting off that razor sharp edge and just putting a tiny flat on there. Okay, so after that, one easy last operation is the face, the torque shoulder. So this, again, same concept. A cutter just comes in as it's spinning and just whisks away material until it's nicely machined flat and true. So once those 3 surfaces are done, we're done with the entire setup here. So just like you see there, so this one's done. And then we're left with the bolt. So each bolt is slightly different. So I make these little mandrels to hold them, and it's the same concept. We're just going to true up these surfaces in relation to the center line of the firing, in this case, the firing pin hole and the center line of the bolt. So I make up these little stub mandrels. One simply screws into the back and has a tapered section here. I've also got this one for Winchesters. This is for the newer Winchesters. I think this is a 28 thread per inch. They really went bonkers on their thread pitches on the new ones. And then more firing pin hole. So this one's obviously small for like a mini 223 or something. And this is probably big magnum here. And then I got one for standard size. So, I just make these up as they come in. There's a couple for Sakos and Tikkas and more Remingtons in the other end of the shop. But sometimes you just got to make one up as you get them in. So this will be held in the 4-jaw chuck. And that just gives it a little bit easier way of pivoting in the chuck rather than a straight shank section here. And then the firing pin hole itself, I don't jam a center into that because we don't want to waller out that material. That would be bad. So basically I machine, so this goes into the firing pin hole itself, and then this section actually bears against the face of the bolt. So we're holding in accordance with the firing pin hole and the bolt face itself. And then a center, the live center will be held there. And so that's going to be spinning in the lathe like that. So then we come in, and this is part of my blueprinting package, this is included. We come in and we actually cut pockets here for sleeves. So in my spare time, I'll just make a whole bunch of these sleeves, just prepare them so I have them at hand ready when jobs come in. And they're matched sets. So we'll just get into this. I got one to do later today, so I might as well just get this out. So we've got sleeves for the back of the bolt and a matched set for the front. Since this is now held centered round in the back and based off the firing pin in the front, all these cuts are going to be established off the true center line of the bolt, at least in accordance to how centered that firing pin hole is. So we'll go in and cut little pockets here in the back and close to the lugs up front to accommodate for those sleeves. The sleeves will be permanently adhered to the bolt body. And then the next day when everything's cured, we'll come in and machine those down to undersize of the bushings that we used for our bolt bore raceway. So we know in this case, we were what, 702 and 703? Yeah, 703 in the front, 702 in the back. So we know that's the largest size that will fit through that bolt bore raceway. So that means we can take these sleeves and machine them to the same, basically the same diameter. Obviously you need a little clearance, right? So instead of 702 and 703, we'd probably go 701 and 702. Maybe a half thousandths, maybe not. The important surfaces on a bolt, so obviously this is the position that the bolt is fed into the receiver, and then it locks up in the battery, like I showed you earlier with the internal lug of buttons. So really all we care about is the surfaces that correlate to where that bolt locks up inside the receiver, which would be right here in relation to the bolt in this position. Not open, but closed. So what I've done over the years is basically cut these elliptical. So the two surfaces, here and here, will be, like I said, probably 702. The surfaces here and here, we can go all the way back down to the original diameter if we needed to ensure basically good functioning still. You know, you still want the bolt to go into the action with no hangups and then cam into position. So doing it that way allows us to have reliable functioning. And then as it locks up in the battery, now that all that slop is taken up into these two surfaces here in the front and the back of the receiver. Works really, really well. You get the best of both worlds. You get beautiful, smooth operation, and then a nice, it even feels good. You can feel that kind of just lock up, and it gets nice and, I wouldn't say snug, but it definitely, you can tell there's no slop when that guy cams into lockup. Right? So that, in a nutshell, is what happens with your bolt when it's sent to me for the blueprinting process. So essentially, that completes the machining portions of the action. After the sleeves are fit and working reliably, at that point, I can go in and check our lug contact. Now, since these have been machined straight and true, usually we'll have perfect contact from the backs of the lugs to the lug abutments. However, no action is ever in this condition in real world environment. What you got, and what a lot of people fail to realize, is you've got a trigger. Obviously, you need a trigger for a rifle. Now, the trigger has a sear and a spring that actually push up on the back of the bolt. Now, even though we've got sleeves, we would have sleeves on this bolt. This doesn't have sleeves yet, but it will. So even though we have sleeves that take up that, it still forces the back of that bolt up just slightly. So you're thinking, you know, instead of perfectly straight, it's actually canted just a slight bit, which will look what it does with the lugs. So most of the time, when you put the trigger in, you're not going to have contact on that top one still. You know, it's held off by a couple tenths, but it's still held off. So in most cases, I still have to come in here with the trigger in and everything, the firing pin assembly and the trigger in, and then lap these guys in. And usually, like I said, it's always going to be, you got to wear that bottom one down, and we're talking very, very, very little. Like a few strokes, maybe 50 to 100, and that wears that down enough so that both lugs contact. So we'll check that with marker to see which one's contacting. And then if necessary, which usually is somewhat necessary, we'll do a little very light lapping compound in there and lap the lugs in essentially. So that prepares the action and gets everything ready for the barrel. And I won't do this service without a new barrel. Like, there's just no point. You can't reuse a barrel for obviously reasons. It's too small, because now this, where the barrel fits is larger in the blueprinted action. If it's a quality match grade barrel and we got enough shank, we could cut that off and just remachine a new shank. Obviously, you're going to lose about an inch, but that is possible if it's a good barrel, if it's a quality barrel. We could certainly machine that back. But like I said, I won't do this without a quality barrel of some sort. After that, then we have new surfaces, so we'll take measurements and establish all of our dimensions and a spec sheet for the rifle. Get in there, and in preparation for the new barrel. So some of the other tooling that comes into play with that, if we're using the original recoil lug or even oversized, that's where my jig comes in. This will hold a recoil lug. This is held in the four-jaw chuck and centered, and open up the diameter of the recoil lug to accommodate the new barrel tenon. So that would be a one step before the barrel is actually installed in the lathe. We got to make sure the recoil lug fits. This is just an old takeoff barrel here, but Remingtons have the separate recoil lug. So we can reuse the old one, and like I said, just put it in the jig and open that internal diameter up for the larger barrel. Or we can go with an oversized precision ground quality recoil lug. That's usually the best case scenario. We'll just go with a high quality precision ground recoil lug. Okay, so after that, we have all of our new dimensions established for the new barrel. And that's where some of this precision measuring goes in. A depth micrometer is used to check the depths to get some of these measurements for the depths of the internals. High quality Mitutoyo outside diameter micrometer for checking the major diameter of the barrel. Pitch gauge, so that when we take that very first pass, we can confirm that it's actually 16 threads per inch, or the TPI that it needs to be. A fishtail gauge. This helps set up the compound for 60-degree threading, and also sets up the tool to cut 60-degree threads. And then, like I said, we know from our stubs, we know what the major diameter is, so we don't really use wires. I do have a set of wires to measure off of, but normally it's just thread to fit. The barrel work can be done one of two ways. I've got a standard way and a premium way. Standard way is centering the barrel at both ends, so that we're running true on the muzzle and the breech end. The premium way is centering off the chamber section. So the barrel will be held in the lathe, but we are focusing up here where the chamber is. So we're getting that barrel aligned so that it's spinning completely true and straight here up here at the chamber. It takes a lot more work, effort, and time, but it is an option for those who want the absolute best. To achieve that, we've got more bushings. This one is for a 30 cal. I think so. Nope, this is a 6.5 millimeter set. So they're just incrementally sized pilots and bushings for the bore of a barrel. And those can be installed on what's called a range rod, or the piloted end of a reamer or cutting device, such as this. This is a bolt nose recess cutter, and you can see it will accommodate a pilot up here. So even the bore of the barrel is determined down to the 10th for best fit and best machining practices. So essentially, that is the process of our blueprinting process for here at Accurate Rifles and Restorations. This is the attention to detail you're going to get with our services. All of our rifles shoot extremely well. I always guarantee half MOA or better, obviously off a bench with the right load and the right conditions. All that's left to say is I don't do this stuff to the Defiances and Stillers, any of the boutique custom actions. I do not do this to. I will check, and I have seen a few actions that were out, and those got sent back. I don't cut on them. You know, you're spending thousands of dollars on those things because they're supposed to be straight and true. So I don't personally mess with that. I can do this to basically any receiver that's a cylinder. We can do this to Howas, Savages, Remingtons, Winchesters, Mausers, Springfields and Enfields. I can do everything but the threads because I just can't. I'd have to make some kind of funky internal square threading device, and that's a can of worms I don't really want to get into, honestly. So yeah, you got an old rifle you want to rebuild into something that can stand up to competition level. Get in touch. We'll talk about it. We'll see. We see what your options are, what you got to work with, and what your budget is, and all that good stuff. So please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can find all our contact information in the description below there in the video. Visit our website. I'll put that probably here up the top. So you can contact us there. You can find us on Facebook, obviously here on YouTube, and Rumble. We're on Rumble too. So if you're a fan of uncensored content, you can go to Rumble, and we'll look into getting some other social media stuff going on in the future. But that's basically it for now. Thank you very much for watching. If you made it to the end, congratulations. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Leave a little comment there if you got a question or a concern, or a better way to do stuff. Go ahead and leave that down there in the comment section. and subscribe to the channel. We're always putting out new, hopefully interesting content for you. So thank you very much for watching again, and we'll see you on the next one.